Welcome everyone again this wonderful Ekadashi day where we are going to continue our exploration of the qualities of a devotee as they are exemplified and demonstrated and lived and taught by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. So today we're going to be exploring the quality of a devotee that he lives and his whole life is for the benefit of others. So I'm very glad to be here with my good friend Siddhanta Prabhu, who has dedicated his life for the benefit of all of us in compiling these amazing stories and recollections and memories of Srila Prabhupada. So, Siddhanta Prabhu.
Haribo, good to see you again. Happy Ekadashi, everybody.
Happy Ekadashi.
Yeah, so the quality, he works for everyone's benefit. And it's going to be interesting today because we're going to have 8 devotees. I hope we can get them all in. It's one or two more than we usually have. But it's an interesting perspective in analyzing the word everyone, everyone's benefit. So today we're actually going to describe various preaching engagements that Prabhupada had to various types of personalities and discuss how he dealt with each individual for their benefit.
Yeah.
So that'll be the focus as we listen to the stories told by today Rupa Vilas, Narayan, Hari Sari, Atma Tattva, Dhruvanath, Mukhya Devidasi, Ganesh, and Mahabhuti. So some
stellar lineup.
It's a good lineup. So maybe because there are a number of stories and some of them are longer than others, except for this first one. This one pretty much leads off the series that we're going to talk about today. And it's given to us by Rupa Vilas. And then we'll really define what everyone, the definition of everyone for us to understand and perceive in regards to Srila Prabhupada's understanding.
Okay.
So without further ado, let's hear from Rupa Vilas.
Okay.
And in the lecture that he gave, I don't remember most of the lecture, but the one line he spoke, which was really interesting, he said, "This is a movement for the living entity." And I was thinking how, generally we talk about saving the human beings, but he was, describing the movement as a movement for all living entities. So that really struck me.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, you hit the nail on that, when we say, because, I also, when I just heard, everyone, then naturally the tendency is, well, every human being, but this means everyone, every living entity. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, perfect lead in.
Yeah, we could stop there, but no, we have a few more stories. So, but I thought that was a good lead off and introduction to today's topic. Now, the next story from Narayan will give us another concept about how Prabhupada saw and preaching to every living entity, really defining that not just for the human being. So this is a great story. So we'll talk about this on the other side.
Somehow or other, and I'm never quite sure how it happened, he and I ended up alone in the room. And it was Srila Prabhupada's room. He always had a coffee table, which he used as a desk because he liked to sit on the floor. And he had an armoire next to it, a steel cabinet, such as he used to have in India. And in it, he used to keep his correspondence and books and things like that. And Srila Prabhupada was behind the desk, and he was showing me, incidentally to doing something else, how he would open up an envelope with a letter opener and then use the envelope for his reply, and then to save paper and for his first draft. And then he'd draft it out again onto the letter when he had it down the way he wanted it. And somehow he had asked me to do something, and in the end, I ended up behind his desk, and he ended up on the other side. I was so on my toes and alarmed by it the experience of being alone with Prabhupada, it was just like being with Queen Elizabeth or Indra or something of that sort, all alone. And you say, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I have no instruction. I don't even know what to say, because I wasn't just initiated. And I had, you know, been a part of the Hridashri. I was still sort of psychedelicizing a little bit. And Srila Prabhupada was standing there, and I'm sitting there totally mortified, wringing my hands and squirming my toes and wondering what to do next, and not wanting to leave by any means, but not knowing what to do if I stayed. And Srila Prabhupada looked at me and said, we should always be considering what is my duty, he said. And I'm thinking, duty, okay. And I was been hearing impaired since I was young, and I didn't know that. And it's only the last few years I got hearing aids. So I didn't have any hearing aids. So what to speak of Prabhupada's accent and my inability to hear, I was having a hard time understanding, plus the psychedelics residually floating around in my brain cells. So Prabhupada points at this coffee table and says, do you see this ant? And I've been looking very carefully, and I know Srila Prabhupada is the external representative of Super Soul, that when Prabhupada says there's an ant, there's an ant. And I looked at the table, and there was no ant there. And I said, do you see that ant? And I didn't know what he meant. I said, there's no ant. And I said, you know, sort of like yes and no combined, because I didn't want to say no and appear stupid, to not see the spiritual or whatever ant was there. And I didn't want to say yes and be proven a liar, because I couldn't see the ant and I didn't know where it would be found. So then Srila Prabhupada looked at me intensely, as though that the ant issue now being solved, he wanted to get on to real business, and he said, my duty, he said, is to, my job, he said, is to understand what is my duty to this ant. I said, oh no. I said, not only there's an ant that I can't see, but now I have a duty to it. I said, what am I going to do? He said, somehow, Prabhupada looked at me beseechingly almost, somehow I have to help this ant. He said, and maybe I can chant, and he said, reaches down, he says, maybe I can chant Hare Krishna. Or he went like this, feed it a little prasadam. He said, if we can help one ant become Krishna conscious, then our whole movement is a glorious success. And then I realized it was a pure metaphor. That Prabhupada was aware of my bewilderment is pretty obvious. That he used it to make a point was excellent. And there I was, instructed by the invisible ant to whom I had a duty to feed and to chant, and that if I did so, it was our movement, whole movement was a success.
Hare Krishna. That is such a vision. Oh. And to follow in those footsteps. Yes. Great.
A real teaching lesson. The essence is the benefit of everybody, including all living entities. That
all living entities.
Prasadam, I was on a morning walk with Prabhupada talking about Prasadam, and I was 2 feet from him. I'll never forget it. And he described how if an animal or any living entity other than a human being eats prasadam, then they jump over all the other species and take human birth in their next life. So another example of how we can help all living entities. Because prasadam is so potent and beneficial.
Yeah.
So now let us go to Hari Sari Prabhu.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knows Hari Sari.
Yes.
And this is an example how Prabhupada, again, helping work for everyone's benefit in regards to Hari Sari's parents. So let us hear this anecdote from Hari Sari.
My parents came to see me at the manor, and Prabhupada was in London, and I'd come back from London to the manor to meet with my parents. I hadn't seen them for about 5 years, and they had never seen me as a devotee. So during the course of the afternoon, I went to look for some prasadam for them, and there was none. I was told, well, we have an early Sunday feast here and there's nothing left. So I was unable to give them any. Anyway, I took them around the manor and I explained a bit of the philosophy, etc. They were unfortunate in that they didn't get to see Srila Prabhupada. They were just about to leave because they had a 4-hour drive home when Prabhupada came back from London, and he came in through the gate just as we were stood there. and they were, you know, saying goodbye. So they kind of got a glimpse, that was all. Anyway, so afterwards, after they'd gone, I went up to see Srila Prabhupada, and he asked me, well, how did it go with your parents? So I said it was very nice, they were very favourable, and, you know, I showed them the deities, and we looked around, and, you know, I explained a bit of the philosophy. So then Prabhupada said, did they get prasadam? So they said, oh, well, actually I was told there wasn't any. And Prabhupada said, oh. It was almost like, well, what was the use? You know, if they didn't get prasadam, then the whole trip was basically a failure. So, you know, he put a lot of emphasis on prasadam. It was a very practical way, you know, for a person to make advancement in Krishna consciousness.
Yes,
There you
yes.
have it, another Prasadam
Yeah.
story.
Prashad, I mean, it is such a fact. I mean, it's threaded throughout all of these memories. Srila Prabhupada's insistence is that everyone must get prasadam.
Right.
Always. There must be, it always must be there. It should be ready. There should be no lack.
Exactly. So now we're going to hear from Atma Tattva Prabhu,
Mm.
and he will describe an encounter Prabhupada preaching to a businessman, and
Mhm.
how he is engaging this gentleman, obviously for his benefit.
Mm.
So we'll talk about that encounter after we hear from Atma Tattva.
One big businessman, he came, and he was saying, Swamiji, I have this factory here in Delhi, and I have that factory in Zonpur, and he gave a list of his things, and then he said, I have all this, but I can't sleep. So Prabhupada looks at him and he says, that is why you can't sleep. You give all this to me, then you can peacefully sleep. So then he turns to somebody who was sitting there, and he said, I think it was Gopal Krishnaji. He said, take his address. So this man says, no, Swamiji, I can come anytime. Hey, you can come anytime, but we should also be able to come anytime. Take his address. And then he was ready, you know. So yes. And said, no, Swamiji. Prabhupada said, no, take his address. We will relieve you of your problem. You give some of these things to Krishna, then you will be peaceful. And he was like smashed right there. And he did give his address. He had to.
This is Srila Prabhupada's expertise, to see exactly what is the benefit that everyone requires.
Yeah, he obviously, you know, anyone could tell that he was not willing to give up his material possessions to Krishna or to anybody.
Yeah,
But
he
Prabhupada
needed
knew
to.
he needed to for his benefit.
For his benefit.
So that was a nice story there. Next, we're going to hear from Juvanath Prabhu,
Mm.
who sadly is no longer with us, but this is a story where he had never met Prabhupada, and he was an aspiring author. And this will give an example how Prabhupada explained to him for his benefit how to progress in Krishna consciousness.
Yes.
Let's hear from Juvanath.
So I'd had all these preconceived questions I was going to ask, because at that time, you must understand that LSD was my God. You know, I'd interviewed prior to that an associate of Timothy Leary, so I was very much into, you know, glorifying the use of LSD for achieving self-realization. So when I sat there and I was facing Srila Prabhupada directly, I went blank. I was just, as I say, overwhelmed. I was speechless, somehow or other. I'd just gotten a book called The Nectar of Devotion. And I remember reading in that how the pure devotee's eyes were anointed with the pulp of love, the salve of... and looking at Prabhupada's eyes, I could see this. And I could see he was like unlike anyone I'd ever seen in my life. And as I say, I was speechless. So after we had exchanged pleasantries, some moments passed, and then Prabhupada began talking, saying how unfortunate it was that the youth of today were trying to become self-realized through the use of hallucinogenic drugs. And I was just totally taken aback. I couldn't believe it, because this is exactly what I was going to challenge Prabhupada on. So I was just blown away at that point, and all my thoughts of writing a book went out the window. So then after that, kind of Prabhupada broke the ice a bit by talking and saying something that went straight, I could see that he could see actually what I was thinking. So then I plucked up some courage and I began to ask a question. And I think the first question I asked to Prabhupada was, what are the characteristics of a pure devotee? And Prabhupada expounded for about 20 minutes just on that question alone. And I can't remember too much more about the interview. I think I was with Prabhupada for about a full hour, and there was Kulashekar was the only other devotee in the room at the time. But I remember Prabhupada's closing statement, and he looked at me straight in the eyes and he said, "Man is the architecture of his own fortune. So you make your fortune now. Whatever is done is done. Now start a new chapter in your life, and in the next life go back home, back to Godhead." And those words are still ringing in my ears to this day.
Try. Not only working for the benefit of everyone, but being able to perfectly see what is for the benefit of everyone, guided by Krishna in his heart. That's a very nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Prabhupada could read the heart of everyone, and he read Dhruvanath's heart, and he wanted to write a book that he thought would be a bestseller about the benefit of LSD. And Prabhupada nipped that right in the bud, reading his mind, but explaining very gently and kindly for his benefit and our benefit to whatever we've done in the past. Okay, it's in the past. Now become Krishna conscious. Yeah, start from that platform. So without criticism, but just being helpful and beneficial.
That sense what everyone gets from Srila Prabhupada, that he's there for me. I mean, he's just wants to help me.
Exactly. Very good. Very good. Now we're going to hear from Mukhya Devidasi, who I just actually interviewed in Alachua about 2 months ago, 2 weeks ago, actually. Okay. And she has an interesting story where she was in the room with Prabhupada and 2 priests. So this is going to be an encounter that Prabhupada had with a couple of priests in Detroit, Michigan. So let's hear from Mukhya.
And one time I got to go to one of those darshans. It was with 2 priests. And one was an older priest, and I remember him being a very important person, maybe in the Archdiocese of Detroit. There's a lot of Catholics in Detroit. And then the other one was a younger priest, and I thought maybe it was his assistant or just a junior person, but still he was also a priest. And, they, out of politeness and interest, maybe they came to meet Prabhupada. And it was an interesting experience listening to Prabhupada exchange with them, because I could start to see how muddled their thinking was, especially the older priest. Like, he was talking in circles and not really saying much about his kind of understanding of God. And Prabhupada was speaking quite simply and clearly and trying to get it through. And at one point, it came out, well, I think Prabhupada used the word foolish, like, foolish men who don't understand God, we will not be able to, put them in the top levels. And the priest, I think he misunderstood and thought the word foolish might have meant mentally deficient or something. And so in a sense, not understanding who you are in relation to God is a mental deficiency, but they had a little, so the priest got very defensive in a way, and he started saying, no, we work with the poor and the mentally handicapped, and he kept saying the word handicapped, and finally Prabhupada said, handicapped is handicapped. That's another matter. That's not what I'm talking about here. But the priest couldn't, he was in a loop, and he couldn't let it go. And Prabhupada started to say, if I cut off my hand, can you fix my hand? Can you do anything about it? And the priest was like, well, no. Well, that's what I'm telling you. Handicapped is a different thing. We'll discuss that later. But now we want to bring people to the level of God consciousness. And then he started to say how you can't really get there if you're eating meat, if you're killing animals. And I sat there listening to all of it, and I thought, I have this realization, like, I actually know more than these guys. And that was a big thing. I was a young girl, and I have a respect for elders, and I realized that they really didn't know that much. And it became really apparent the way Prabhupada interacted with them. And he wasn't demeaning them at all, but it was frustrating that they could not understand. The younger priest was a little bit better at understanding, actually. He sort of got it more. And in fact, by the end, he was very enamored of Prabhupada. And I think I read in Hari Sari's diary maybe that somebody said to Prabhupada after they had left something like that younger priest, he was ready to become your disciple. And Prabhupada said, yes, if you speak the truth, they will become your disciples. So that was pretty fabulous, that whole experience for me, hearing Prabhupada speak to other religious person like that. Because I think most of us who became devotees then had the experience that whatever religious path we had been raised in was not answering the questions for us. I think that was a kind of a universal theme of the 60s and 70s anyway. So there it was, like in real life, in real time.
Yeah, the benefit of everyone. Here he is, just here I am to give you what you're missing.
And patiently.
Patiently, just
Patiently.
selflessly, just for you, and adjusting, but not letting you off the hook either.
Right. Very good. Now let's hear from Ganesh Prabhu, who is going to tell us about a time where he was in the room with Prabhupada and a guest came, but a different type of guest. And we'll see how Prabhupada was trying to preach to him, and obviously for his benefit. So let us hear from Ganesh.
But this one time, I guess it must have been in the evening, this one psychology student came to see Srila Prabhupada. So the man came in and he sat down opposite Srila Prabhupada and was introduced, and Prabhupada had his bead bag on his hand, and Prabhupada sat there and was looking at the man, and the man had glasses on and his head was kind of down like this, and I can't remember whether he was actually looking at Srila Prabhupada through his glasses or whether he was just looking down at the floor. But it was strange. It was a strange experience. And so Prabhupada looked at Amoga, who was sitting in front onto the side, the right side of Srila Prabhupada, and motioned with his head like that. So Amoga said, Srila Prabhupada would like to know if you have any questions. And the man didn't respond. He just kept on looking down with a just complete deadpan face with his glasses on. He just sat there. And I began to feel very uneasy because this was my first very intimate association with Srila Prabhupada, living with Prabhupada. I was very afraid of doing the wrong thing, and I was very uneasy in silence. So and there was a lot of silence in the room at this time. So then Prabhupada's hand began to move, and he began to mouth the mantra, although it was, again, practically inaudible. And all I could hear coming from Prabhupada's mouth was Ram, Ram, Ram. I couldn't even hear the Krishnas, but I managed to hear the Rams, and Prabhupada's hand was moving in his bed, and he was looking at this man, just looking at him. So then, obviously, nothing was going to go on. So Srila Prabhupada quoted from the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I can't remember the text. Actually, I believe it was Bhumi Rapo Nalobayo Kam Mano Buddhi Evachar, I think 7.4 in the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada began to describe the different elements, and he came to the element of the mind, and he began to explain how mind, intelligence, and ego, these are all subtle things. And carrying on from that, basically Prabhupada was speaking to all of us in the room, but he was looking at the man. Following on from the mind, Prabhupada began to speak about ghosts. And that was a little strange, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. But Srutakirti, who was up on Prabhupada's left on the end of the table, and we were all sitting on the floor, Prabhupada was on a mattress, Srutakirti began to smile and he chuckled a little bit. And he interrupted Prabhupada. He said, "Prabhupada, why are you talking about ghosts?" And I was really taken aback when he asked that question. I thought it was being too familiar, but of course he had a familiar relationship with Prabhupada, and I didn't know anything about Srila Prabhupada. He was able to have that rasa with Prabhupada. I didn't consider it offensive at all, but he laughed and he said, "Prabhupada, why are you talking about ghosts?" And Prabhupada ignored the question and just continued looking at the man. And he began to describe how ghosts are subtle things and how they don't have bodies and how it's a very sinful body, that one still has material desires but cannot fulfill them through a gross body. And then Prabhupada, at one point, as he was speaking, and he said, and sometimes the ghosts, because they're powerful, they have mind over matter, sometimes they move things. And Prabhupada got his hand and went like that through the air. I remember that, and it was as though you could see a glass moving through the air by Prabhupada's hand. And we began to realize, as Prabhupada spoke more, that this man was actually ghostly haunted. Here he was studying psychology, the science of the mind, but somehow or other this man's mind was overtaken. So I got up enough courage during that speech of Srila Prabhupada to ask a question that came into my mind at the time, and I asked Prabhupada, "Well, Prabhupada, if the ghost overtakes the person, does that mean that there are two souls in the body? Does that mean that the ghost soul enters the body and that there are two souls moving around in the body?" And Prabhupada said no. He doesn't go in the body, but he exerts his influence over the body. But he doesn't actually enter this, so there are not two souls managing the body. So that was an unusual experience.
Everyone, including the ghosts. We've gone from ants to parents to priests, and now even ghosts. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Jai.
But that individual, the student, I'm sure got benefit, by
Yes,
preaching
yeah.
from a pure devotee,
Yeah.
whether how long it took for him to come around.
And the ghost probably got benefit too.
Right, exactly. All right, excellent. We have one last story from Mahabodhi Prabhu,
Booty.
who is a very nice devotee. But when he first met Prabhupada, he was a yogi of sorts and a great debater.
Oh.
And this is an anecdote, a story that he tells where he had not joined the temple. This is prior to him joining, and what benefit Prabhupada's encounter with him had on his life. So let us hear from Mahabodhi.
When I did come back the next day, because I lived in Long Beach, and I took my parents' car and went to the temple early in the morning. I had met Prabhupada's secretary, Shama Sundar, at that time, and he said, "Would you like to go up and see Srila Prabhupada?" And that, of course, that was my intent. My intent was to challenge him. I had come to challenge him to see if he really is a guru, and the aspect I had made I'd thought about that morning, and I made 4 points. He has to be able to know the absolute truth. He has to be able to know the process of the absolute truth. He has to be able to read my mind, and he has to know what the future is, be able to predict the future. Now, why I came up with those, who knows? But anyway, that's what I thought would give me the right answers. So I was coming in ready for, to challenge Prabhupada, and which is the Maya I was in. I was fighting with people. So I came in to challenge Srila Prabhupada, and they brought me in the room, and I sat in the back, was the only open space, and there was all these sannyasis there with dandas, which I hadn't seen before. And it was like a room full of sticks. And then there was like 2 people in white dhotis, which were Karandar and Jayatirtha. And then I was the only non-initiated devotee there with my long curling hair. And I was having difficulty sitting in a lotus position because I was too muscular built up. And then Prabhupada was just finished singing a song, and he was looking around the room. and looked from side to side, and then he looked straight at me. And immediately he said, "Why are you a creepina?" And just boom, it was like, of course, I was thinking, I hadn't said anything now. What is a creepina? And in my mind, and Prabhupada says, creepina is opposite of brahmana. And he started explaining how a brahmana is the highest class in society. They're meant to know the absolute truth and be the mouth for God. And at that point, because he was so heavy, I remember Karandar and Jayatirtha and the sannyasis in the front sort of made a little aisle, so there was a direct contact for Prabhupada and me. And so I was looking at him thinking, what is this? I'm just being, screamed at of being a miserly. It means miserly. And then Prabhupada explained, he said, if you have abilities, you have abilities. Since you're not using them for Krishna, then you're a miser. So we had never met before. And I came in challenging, and so Prabhupada first took the first whap and stuck it to me. Then progressively, then he started explaining the process of bhakti, the process that the absolute truth, what the absolute truth is the lotus feet of Krishna, and then he explained the process of bhakti, of rendering service. And so progressively my 4 prerequisites for being a guru was becoming erased one after another. Simultaneously I was being, kicked in the face by Prabhupada's, lotus mercy, by my nonsense challenging spirit. And finally it was at the last point, and Prabhupada was, having his way with me. And I kept ruggedly insisting in my mind, well, he didn't say any, he didn't predict the future. So, and just as I was thinking like that, obviously Prabhupada, you could tell he was seeing right through you. And you felt naked by his vision. And Prabhupada called for Pradyumna, and which was his traveling translator and secretaries for his translations. So he asked for Pradyumna to go bring him the big volume that he translates from. This was a 10 commentary volume of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which has all the major commentaries of the Vaishnavacharyas. So at that time, in the early 70s, he had not read from the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam before. So Prabhupada then asked him, he turned to get the book. When Pradyumna gave it to him, he turned to the 12th canto and he started predicting the future for the age of Kali. And he started saying, and he looked at me and he said, people will think they're beautiful by having long hairs. And I had this long hair. And he started explaining many of the different predictions in the age of Kali, and I felt so defeated. I hadn't even opened my mouth. I hadn't even, thank God, by Krishna's grace, I hadn't made any offenses other than offensively coming into him. And that was the first time Prabhupada smashed me. And at that, immediately after the darshan over, I just bulleted out of the room. I mean, didn't see anybody, but ran down the stairs, jumped in the car, and started driving back home to Long Beach. And I was thinking, well, I've been called a miser, and I'm thinking all these different things. And then I'm going over all the stuff that Prabhupada said. And finally I reached home. I said, well, why don't you just face it? I'd just been defeated. And I wasn't used to being defeated, but then I remembered that this is what I was looking for, and here's an honest and regal and powerful guru, and I recognized I had been defeated. So it took a little bit of courage, and so I drove back the next morning and I wrote a check out for $1,000, and I saw Karandar down in the gift shop, so I gave it to him and said, made it out to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, and he looked at it. At that time $1,000 was a really big donation, and he said, "Oh, come, give it to Srila Prabhupada." And I said, "No, that's okay." I survived the first meeting, so he put it, was wait here. So he brought it up to Srila Prabhupada, and as he gave it to Srila Prabhupada, he had me waiting there, and he came back down, and he told Karandar to tell me that I have understood. So that was my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada.
That's also a very fitting conclusion.
Exactly.
Because it points out, that serving the benefit of others doesn't always mean, there's sometimes the scalpel is required, to cut out to cut the knot. Yeah. So that's very nice.
Yeah, the soft as a rose or strong like a thunderbolt. So various aspects to get through to a person's heart so they can make advancement
Yes.
for
yes.
everyone, again, working
Yes.
for everyone's benefit
Yeah.
accordingly to their nature and where they're at.
Yeah.
So that's it for today for this
Thank
Ekadashi.
you.
Well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
watching and sharing, everybody. Next Ekadashi will be the quality number 11, which is he is very peaceful. So we'll try to find some more stories that will fit that
yes.
particular quality.
Nice transition, Jai. Thank you, everyone. We see you next time. Hare Krishna.
Haribol.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.